In the quiet days of late summer, in the year 1666, London lay beneath a sky of soft clouds and gentle sun. The great city, largest in England, was alive with the sounds of trade and chatter. Narrow streets, winding like veins, carried the lifeblood of its people. Merchants selling goods, children laughing, carts creaking over cobblestones. The houses stood tall and close, leaning toward one another, their timber frames blackened with age, their upper floors jutting out so far that the sky above looked like a narrow strip. Windows were small, glass was expensive, and most doors opened directly onto lanes crowded with life. The city was built of wood and tar, beams soaked with centuries of smoke, walls patched again and again, roofs of thatch and shingles, chimneys built hastily and often left to crumble. The air was thick with the mingled smells of bread, fish, leather, and smoke. Marketplaces thrived. At Billingsgate, fishmongers shouted their wares. At Smithfield, the cattle market bellowed with the cries of animals and men alike. Stalls lined the lanes, their cloth canopies flapping as buyers crowded to examine figs, cheeses, or bolts of wool. And above it all rose the great dome and towers of St. Paul's Cathedral. The old cathedral, medieval and weathered, its stones darkened by soot, yet still majestic in the hearts of the people. London, in those days, was a city alive but vulnerable. The plague had only recently loosened its grip. The Great Plague of 1665 had taken tens of thousands, leaving whole families gone, houses shuttered in sorrow. And yet, Londoners pushed forward. Alehouses were once again filled with laughter. Bells rang from parish churches. Carpenters, tailors, and bakers went about their trade, rebuilding their livelihoods. But beneath the life and motion of the city lay hidden dangers. The houses were packed too closely, built mostly of timber, coated with tar and pitch that caught fire easily. Streets were narrow, barely wide enough for two carts to pass. Firefighting in those days was primitive. Leather buckets, hand-pumped squirts of water, and firehooks to tear down buildings. The city was, in truth, a tinderbox, waiting for a single spark. Yet the people did not think of fire as they lived their daily lives. Children ran through alleys chasing hoops. Housewives scrubbed linens and hung them from upper windows. Apprentices hauled barrels of ale into taverns, their laughter echoing down the lanes. In Cheapside, goldsmiths displayed their shining wares. In Fleet Street, printers inked their presses. London was proud, bustling, and alive. At night, the city glowed with the warm light of hearths and candles. The streets were darker, quieter, but not silent. Taverns filled with voices, and the air was heavy with smoke from countless chimneys. Horses' hooves echoed on stone, while the Thames reflected flickering light from lanterns hung on riverboats. Few thought of the danger, for fires were common in London, but small ones. A spark might catch on a thatch roof or in a workshop, and neighbors would gather with buckets to pour water until the flames died. London had survived countless such blazes before. Why would the people suspect that a far greater one lay ahead? On the evening of September 1st, the city slept as it had so many nights before. Candles guttered out, shutters were drawn, and hearths smoldered low. The plague had left its scars, yet London felt alive again. Its people dreamed of trade, of harvest, of life returning to normal. But the air was dry. The summer had left timbers parched, beams cracked, and rooftops brittle. The winds that whispered down the Thames carried a restless edge. The city, though unaware, was ready to burn. Somewhere on Pudding Lane, in a small crowded house that belonged to the King's baker, loaves baked in the ovens, their scent drifting into the night. The flames within those ovens crackled as they always did. But in the dry air, in the cramped timbers of that home, danger lingered. London did not know it then, but the peace of that evening would soon be shattered. In just a few hours, a spark would leap from those ovens and turn a quiet night into a storm of fire. The city, ancient and proud, was on the edge of disaster. And so we stand, on the last calm night, listening to the distant bells, smelling the smoke of hearths, watching the dark river glide past the glowing windows. London is still whole, but only for this final moment. It is the early hours of Sunday, September 2nd, 1666. London lies in deep slumber. The bells of midnight have long since faded into silence. The River Thames glimmers faintly in the pale light of the moon. The streets, empty now, seem still, as if the city itself is holding its breath. In a small bakery on Pudding Lane, life has not yet paused. Thomas Farriner, the king's baker, and his family work through the night. The ovens roar with heat, their brick walls glowing with a steady fire that never truly rests. Bread is in constant demand, and bakers keep their ovens burning. The air inside is hot, thick with smoke, and the crackle of flame mingles with the smell of yeast and grain. No one knows exactly how it began. Perhaps a spark leapt from the oven onto the wooden floor. Perhaps a tiny ember slipped between the cracks in the hearth. Or perhaps the fire had been left burning just a little too long. What is certain is this: in the dry, parched air of that late summer night, the flames found their chance. At first it was small, a flicker on the timber beams, a wisp of smoke curling upward into the rafters. But timber that had dried through weeks of summer heat caught quickly, and the tarred wood spread the flame faster still. The blaze, once contained to the oven, crept across the room, licking at beams, leaping upward into the upper floors. The Farriner family awoke in terror. Thomas rushed to smother the flames, but water was scarce, and buckets too small. His wife called for their daughter. Servants scrambled, coughing, as smoke filled the house. Panic spread in the narrow rooms as flames devoured the timbers with shocking speed. In desperation, they fled, climbing through a neighbor's window into the night. All escaped, save for one maid, trapped in the rising inferno. Hers was the first life taken by the fire. Outside, the street was still dark and quiet. But soon, neighbors stirred, woken by shouts and the smell of smoke. They gathered with buckets of water, passing them hand to hand. Fire hooks were brought to pull down burning beams. But the fire was already too strong. The narrow houses, leaning so close together, carried the flames from one to another. Beams cracked. Roofs collapsed. Sparks flew across the lane, setting alight anything they touched. The alarm spread. Parish constables rushed to the scene, calling for help. But firefighting in London was crude and slow. The men of the parish ordered fire breaks, houses torn down to stop the flames from spreading. Yet householders resisted. No one wanted their home destroyed, even to save the city. Arguments flared as precious minutes were lost. By the time the decision was forced, the flames had already leapt beyond control. The wind rose. From the east, a restless gust funneled down the narrow lanes, carrying sparks and embers high into the night. They rained down upon thatched roofs, igniting them in seconds. The blaze roared louder, a monster fed by wood and pitch, driven by wind and chaos. By dawn, the fire had already consumed much of Pudding Lane. The sun rose not to light a peaceful city, but to reveal clouds of smoke boiling into the sky. Londoners awoke to the sound of bells and the sight of flame, spreading faster than they could imagine. From house to house, street to street, the inferno marched forward. Mothers clutched their children, rushing into the streets with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Men struggled to drag heavy chests and furniture through the narrow lanes, only to drop them in panic when sparks fell upon their hair and clothes. The air was filled with the cries of neighbors, the barking of dogs, the crack of collapsing beams. By mid-morning, the fire had leapt from Pudding Lane to surrounding streets, Fish Street Hill, Thames Street, and beyond. Warehouses packed with oil, timber, and rope caught fire, exploding in violent bursts that sent flames shooting skyward. The river itself, lined with boats and barges, began to glow with reflected fire. Crowds gathered at the water's edge, desperate to escape. Some tried to load their possessions onto boats, their belongings spilling into the river. Others looked on in horror as the fire leapt from wharf to wharf, chasing them even here. London, which only hours before had been quiet in its slumber, was now a city in chaos. The fire had begun its terrible march, and nothing, it seemed, could stop it. This was no ordinary blaze. This was no accident to be contained with buckets and hooks. This was something greater, something fierce and alive. The Great Fire had begun. Morning has come to London, September 2nd, 1666. But this is no ordinary dawn. The rising sun is hidden behind a thick curtain of smoke. The city stirs to confusion and dread as shouts echo from parish to parish. The fire that began on Pudding Lane is no longer a local blaze. It has become a storm of flame, moving with a terrifying will of its own. From the moment the first bells rang in alarm, people poured into the streets. Their faces were pale, their voices frantic. Some rushed with buckets to help fight the fire, while others fled with bundles of clothing and food. Entire families dragged heavy trunks through the crooked lanes, desperate to save their most precious belongings. But the fire was faster than their feet, leaping across roofs, racing ahead like a predator. By mid-morning, the wind had grown strong, howling down the narrow lanes. Each gust carried sparks like fiery arrows, flung high into the sky. They rained down on the rooftops, setting entire rows of houses ablaze within moments. London was built for disaster. Its medieval timber buildings leaned into one another, their thatched roofs and wooden beams dry from a long summer. It was as if the whole city had been waiting, ready for this single spark to awaken its weakness. The flames devoured Fish Street Hill, climbed toward the Church of St. Magnus, and leapt over to Thames Street. Here, the worst danger lay. Warehouses lined the river, stacked to the rafters with oil, pitch, tar, hemp, and timber, all the ingredients to feed an inferno. One after another they exploded into flame, sending plumes of fire roaring skyward. The heat grew unbearable. Barrels of oil burst like cannon shots, scattering burning liquid across the cobbles. The riverfront, once the city's pride, now burned like a torch. Flames reflected upon the Thames until it seemed the river itself was on fire. Those who had run to the water for safety found little comfort there. Boats overloaded with people rocked dangerously, some capsizing as panicked families tried to escape. The cries of children, the shouting of men, and the wailing of women filled the smoke-thick air. At the same time, within the city, chaos reigned. Firefighters with leather buckets and hand pumps worked desperately, but the fire outpaced every effort. Constables called for fire breaks, the pulling down of houses to stop the blaze from spreading further. But arguments stalled their work. Homeowners refused to see their properties destroyed, even when the fire was already racing toward them. In the confusion, authority broke down. Orders were shouted, ignored, and repeated to no effect. Samuel Pepys, the famous diarist, watched from afar and later recorded his shock. He described the city as all in flames, the fire burning so violently that it seemed unstoppable. He hurried to Whitehall to inform King Charles II, who, upon hearing the news, was shaken but quick to act. The king ordered the use of fire breaks and the demolition of houses. Yet still, in the heart of the city, the fire pressed onward. By afternoon, the inferno had grown monstrous. The sound of collapse rolled through the streets as roofs gave way and walls crumbled. Great timbers, centuries old, fell with thunderous cracks. Entire parishes seemed swallowed whole. The fire leapt the river of air, consuming house after house in waves of destruction. People stumbled through the smoke with their faces blackened and their arms full of whatever they could carry. A Bible, a painting, a handful of coins. Others abandoned all possessions. Their only thought survival. Dogs barked wildly, horses bolted in terror, and bells tolled endlessly, their sound mingling with the roar of fire until the city itself seemed to cry out. As evening approached, the fire stretched farther than anyone could have believed. From Pudding Lane, it had marched across the heart of the city, and now it threatened even the grand buildings that seemed untouchable. Churches, inns, and markets fell one after another, their steeples glowing before crashing into heaps of flame. The night sky was a nightmare, a ceiling of fire and smoke. Londoners watched in disbelief as their world turned red and orange, the glow so bright that it lit the countryside miles away. Those who had fled to the fields outside the city looked back to see London transformed into a furnace. And this was only the first day. The fire had only begun its destruction. The city's heart was still in danger, and no one yet knew how far the inferno would reach, or if anything at all could stop it. The sun rises on London September 3rd, 1666. But this is no sunrise of hope. The dawn reveals a city already scarred and broken. What began as a fire on Pudding Lane has now grown into a beast too large to control. The smoke hangs heavy over the Thames, rolling like storm clouds across the horizon. From the riverbanks to the hilltops, Londoners look on in horror. Their city is burning. The fire has grown stronger overnight, driven onward by the fierce east wind. The narrow medieval streets, once a maze of life, now form a trap for flame and smoke. Wooden houses catch like kindling, collapsing before their owners can flee. The heat is so intense that stones split apart, iron hinges twist and break, and glass melts into rivulets that run down the walls. The very bones of London are turning to ash. By mid-morning, the destruction has reached Cheapside, the heart of the city's commerce. The market stalls, once crowded with merchants and customers, vanish beneath the blaze. Entire warehouses of cloth, silks, and goods from distant lands are consumed in minutes. The wealth of London, stored in its goods and treasures, becomes fuel for the inferno. The great churches, symbols of strength and sanctuary, cannot withstand the fury. One after another, spires catch and tumble. Bells, heated beyond endurance, fall from their towers with deafening crashes. At St. Lawrence Jewry, flames race up the aisles, the roof collapsing as parishioners weep outside. St. Mary le Bow, with its famous bells, becomes a heap of glowing rubble, the sound of its collapse echoing through the city like a funeral toll. The fire shows no mercy. It leaps across lanes, devours bridges, and surges onward. It is no longer just a blaze but a storm, feeding on itself, sucking oxygen from the air, roaring like a living monster. The wind throws sparks so far that buildings thought safe ignite without warning. Families who believed they had escaped wake to find the fire suddenly at their doors. Panic grips the streets. Thousands push toward the Thames, hoping the river might save them. They crowd into boats, barges, and ferries until the waters are choked with desperate souls. Some row to the southern shore, others float downstream, while many simply cling to the hope that distance will protect them. But as they drift, they watch the skyline collapse. The city they once called home is now a volcano of fire and smoke. Samuel Pepys writes again in his diary, "All the sky was of a fiery aspect, like the end of the world." He describes entire parishes destroyed, houses exploding as their stores of gunpowder and oil ignite, flames shooting so high that the heavens themselves seem ablaze. Meanwhile, King Charles II and his brother, the Duke of York, ride into the city. They see firsthand the scale of the disaster. The king commands fire breaks, ordering men to tear down buildings in the fire's path. But the work is slow, and the fire moves with terrible speed. The Duke leads efforts himself, urging men forward with picks and axes. Yet even royal presence cannot stop the inferno. By afternoon, the fire surges toward the Guildhall, the seat of the city's government. Built of stone, it has stood for centuries, a symbol of London's endurance. But even stone cannot resist the blaze. The roof ignites, the walls crack, and the hall collapses into a hollow shell, its proud history reduced to smoldering ruins. And still, the flames march onward. Houses are abandoned mid-meal, tables still set, loaves of bread still cooling on the hearth. Shops filled with goods stand unlocked, their doors flung wide as owners flee. Livelihoods vanish in a single day, fortunes erased without a trace. As night falls on the second day, the fire's glow is seen for miles around. Refugees huddle in fields outside the city walls, watching with despair. The night air is filled with the stench of burning wood, tar, and flesh. The cries of children mingle with the low sobs of parents who know they will never see their homes again. By the end of day 2, nearly half of the medieval city lies in ruins. The fire has consumed more than anyone believed possible, and yet, it shows no sign of slowing. London stands on the edge of annihilation. The fate of the city hangs in the balance, and the worst is still to come. September 4th, 1666, the third day of the Great Fire of London. By now, the flames have consumed whole districts, erasing centuries of life in just hours. But as dawn breaks, attention turns to one building above all others, St. Paul's Cathedral. For centuries, St. Paul's has stood as the heart of London's faith and pride. Its great Gothic spire once towered over the city, visible to sailors far down the Thames. Within its vast stone walls lay tombs of kings, bishops, poets, and heroes. Its library held priceless manuscripts, its cloisters a sanctuary of peace. To Londoners, St. Paul's was not simply a church, it was the soul of the city. Yet on this day, even St. Paul's is not safe. At first, many believe the cathedral will survive. Built of stone, it seems stronger than the timber houses already lost. Crowds gather around its grounds, bringing their belongings, convinced the great walls will shield them. Merchants pile bales of cloth and books inside, thinking the church a safe storehouse. Refugees kneel in prayer, their voices trembling as the air thickens with smoke. But they are wrong. The flames creep closer, carried by the wind. Nearby houses explode into fireballs as their stores of oil, pitch, and gunpowder ignite. Sparks fly through the air like fiery rain. And soon the roof of the cathedral, covered in timber and lead, begins to smolder. Inside, the heat grows unbearable. Wooden scaffolding, left behind from recent repairs, becomes a ladder for the fire. The blaze climbs quickly, racing upward. Within minutes, the timbers are a roaring furnace. The lead roof melts and flows like a river, pouring in streams of molten silver down the walls. Witnesses later describe the sight as apocalyptic. Great sheets of flame leap high into the sky, illuminating the city for miles. Stones crack like gunfire. Windows burst outward with deafening force. Sparks shower down on the crowd outside, who scatter in terror as the mighty cathedral begins to collapse. The spire, once the pride of London, groans and twists in the heat. Then, with a thunderous roar, it crumbles, crashing into the nave below. The walls shake, the ground trembles, and a wave of fire and smoke bursts forth, engulfing everything nearby. The tombs of saints and bishops are torn apart. Manuscripts and books, centuries old, are reduced to ash in seconds. Treasures of art and history vanish in an instant. Samuel Pepys, watching from afar, records in his diary, "Paul's is burned, and all Cheapside." His words are few, but the loss is immeasurable. For Londoners, the fall of St. Paul's is more than just destruction. It is heartbreak. The very symbol of their city, their faith, and their endurance lies in ruins. Some fall to their knees, weeping. Others simply stare in silence, unable to comprehend that the cathedral is gone. Around the ruins, chaos reigns. Refugees who had sought shelter there scramble to save themselves, dragging what little they can carry. The goods merchants had stored within are lost, their fortunes gone in smoke, and the fire, unchecked, uses the cathedral's destruction as fuel, surging onward into the surrounding districts. By nightfall, all of St. Paul's lies in glowing rubble. Great chunks of stone stand blackened, their carved edges softened by flame. The once proud bells lie melted into shapeless lumps of bronze. The spire, the cloisters, the library, all gone. Only ashes remain. The destruction of St. Paul's marks a turning point. Londoners realize now that nothing is safe. No building, no matter how strong, can withstand the firestorm. Panic spreads faster than the flames. Thousands more flee the city, carrying only their children and what food they can find. They leave behind houses, shops, and memories, knowing they will never see them again. For those who remain, the night sky is one of fire and terror. The glow of the cathedral's ruins lights the city like a monstrous torch. Smoke rolls high into the heavens, visible far beyond London's borders. And all the while, the fire pushes on, relentless, merciless, devouring everything in its path. On this third day, the city's spirit seems to fall with its great cathedral. If even St. Paul's could not endure, then what hope remains for London? The answer lies ahead. For though the flames still rage, the fight to save the city is far from over. September 5th, 1666. The Great Fire has burned for 3 days, and the city of London is now unrecognizable. Entire neighborhoods lie in smoldering ruin. Smoke covers the sky, choking out the sun, and yet the fire still spreads, a monster that refuses to be tamed. By this day, survival is all that remains. Tens of thousands of Londoners pour into the streets, clutching what little they can carry. Mothers drag children by the hand. Fathers push carts piled high with bedding, food, and family heirlooms. Dogs bark wildly, horses rear in terror, and the air is filled with the cries of people leaving behind the only lives they have ever known. The roads leading out of London become rivers of humanity. Some flee north, toward fields and open country, while others push toward the Thames, hoping to escape by boat. Barges and ferries, usually calm on the water, now rock dangerously under the weight of desperate passengers. Families cram onto them, praying the flames will not follow across the river. And still, the fire roars. Every gust of wind throws sparks into the air, carrying fire to new streets, new homes. The city burns with a sound that survivors will never forget. The cracking of timbers, the shattering of glass, the thunder of collapsing walls. The very earth seems to tremble as building after building falls into ruin. Amid the chaos, courage emerges. Groups of citizens form human chains, passing buckets of water from the river in a desperate attempt to douse the flames. Soldiers dig fire breaks, pulling down houses with axes and hooks, trying to halt the fire's advance. Others climb onto rooftops, beating at embers with wet cloths, risking their lives for neighbors and strangers alike. Even King Charles II joins the fight. Unlike many rulers who would have fled, he rides into the city himself, giving orders, calming the terrified, and encouraging workers to pull down houses to save the greater whole. With him is his brother, the Duke of York, who commands the soldiers. Together, they try to bring order to the unthinkable. But it is not enough. For every house pulled down, 10 more ignite. The fire is too vast, too powerful. The wind feeds it, driving it onward like a living beast. By evening, it has consumed whole markets, great halls, and entire streets of shops and homes. The wealth of London, goldsmiths' treasures, merchants' goods, centuries of work, vanishes in smoke and ash. The people, exhausted, watch helplessly. Families camp in fields outside the city, their possessions spread out under makeshift tents of blankets and canvas. Some sit silently, staring at the red glow on the horizon. Others wail openly, mourning not just their homes, but their very way of life. The air outside London is thick with grief, but also with determination. For though they have lost much, they are still alive. Among the survivors are stories of both despair and hope. A mother carries her infant, wrapped in nothing but rags, through the night, never stopping despite bleeding feet. An old man drags a chest filled with his family's records, refusing to let the memory of generations burn. A boy helps his father row a boat loaded with strangers across the river, saving lives though he himself has lost everything. In the fields, the displaced people build small communities. They share food, tell stories, and comfort one another. Though the fire rages behind them, humanity endures. Londoners discover that even stripped of their homes and possessions, they still have each other. By the end of this 4th day, hope flickers again. For the first time, the wind shifts. The flames, once unstoppable, begin to weaken as they reach the city's edge, where open ground gives them nothing to feed upon. Fire breaks, dug in sweat and desperation, finally start to hold. But London is far from saved. Thousands are homeless, churches are gone, markets are gone. St. Paul's Cathedral lies in ruins, and the fire still smolders in many corners, threatening to rise again. Yet amid the destruction, a thought takes root. Perhaps the fire can be stopped. Perhaps if they endure one more day, the city can be spared from complete annihilation. Night falls over the refugee camps outside London. The horizon glows like the mouth of a furnace, and the air is heavy with ash. But instead of the wails of panic, the night is filled with murmurs of exhausted prayer. Men and women lie side by side, their children clinging to them, as the burning city hums like a great beast in the distance. London may have been broken, but its people remain. And tomorrow they will rise again to face the flames, for survival, for their families, and for the hope that out of the ashes, something new may yet be born. September 6, 1666. At last, the fire begins to die. For 4 nights and 5 long days, London has burned without mercy. Entire parishes have vanished. 4/5 of the medieval city lies in ash and rubble. But on this final day, the wind has calmed, and the inferno that once devoured everything in its path now flickers weakly against the blackened stones. The monster is beaten, but the victory feels hollow. The scale of destruction is beyond imagination. Nearly 90 churches, thousands of homes, shops, and warehouses, gone. The great St. Paul's Cathedral, once the pride of the city, lies in ruins, its mighty dome collapsed into a heap of twisted lead and shattered stone. And yet, among the smoke and ashes, Londoners begin to rise. The first task is survival. Refugee camps outside the city swell with people. In fields and open spaces, families huddle under makeshift shelters built from carts, broken timbers, and scraps of cloth. They share what food they can, cooking over small fires, living day to day in a world that has been forever changed. But despair cannot last forever. Even in the ruins, life begins to stir. Merchants set up stalls in the open air, selling what goods remain. Bakers build temporary ovens to feed the hungry. The bells of churches that survived ring softly, reminding the people that faith endures even when stone crumbles. In the charred streets, children laugh as they chase each other among the ruins, their innocence a fragile but powerful sign that the city will not stay silent forever. King Charles II walks through the devastated streets himself, speaking with survivors, offering encouragement, and promising that London will be rebuilt, not as it was, but stronger, safer, and grander than before. His words carry weight, for though the fire has destroyed, it has also cleared the way for renewal. Plans are quickly drawn. Visionaries like Sir Christopher Wren imagine a new London, with wide boulevards, open squares, and buildings of stone instead of timber. Though much of this vision will prove too costly to achieve fully, the seeds of change are planted here. London will never again be the cramped wooden city it once was. Out of fire, a new order will rise, but rebuilding is not immediate. For many, the loss is too personal, too deep. Families mourn not only homes, but loved ones lost in the flames. Records are gone, businesses wiped out, communities scattered. The grief runs through every street like an invisible river. At night, the glow of smoldering embers still lights the horizon, a cruel reminder of what was taken. And yet, hope persists. The people of London refuse to vanish. They work with bare hands to clear rubble. They salvage bricks, timbers, and iron from the wreckage. Farmers from the countryside bring food into the camps. Tradesmen offer their skills freely, rebuilding not just structures, but the very fabric of society. In their resilience, London's true strength is revealed. Slowly, life returns. The markets open again. New houses are built, this time of brick and stone. Streets are laid wider to prevent future disasters. Water pumps and fire brigades are organized, lessons learned from tragedy. Out of the ashes of the Great Fire emerges a London prepared for the future. The disaster becomes legend. Survivors will tell their children, and their children's children, about the week when the city nearly vanished. They will remember the flames that turned night into day, the smoke that blotted out the sky, the terror of flight, and the relief when it finally ended. But they will also remember courage, the neighbors who helped one another, the soldiers who fought the fire, the king who stood with his people, and the sheer will to endure. In time, the fire will be seen not just as a tragedy, but as a turning point. The old medieval London is gone, but in its place rises a city that will become the heart of an empire, the symbol of resilience, and a beacon of endurance through centuries of change. As the final embers fade into the cool September night, the city breathes again. The silence is heavy, but it is not empty. It is filled with the unspoken promise that London will endure, as it always has, through fire, plague, and war. The Great Fire of London destroyed much, but it could not destroy the spirit of its people. Out of ashes, they will build again. Out of loss, they will find strength. And out of destruction, they will shape a London that will stand for centuries to come. The fire has ended, but the story of London has only just begun.